All right, let's dive into this deep dive into the art of war.
Yeah.
We're talking about like one of the oldest and most like influential military treatises ever written. This book has been studied by everybody, from like generals to CEOs and everybody in between. It was written by Sun Tzu, who was a high-ranking Chinese military general, strategist, and philosopher. And he lived during the second half of the Zhou dynasty in ancient China. So that puts us somewhere between like 771 to 256 BCE.
Yeah, it's really fascinating about the art of war is that even though it was written like centuries ago, its principles still resonate today, and that's what we're going to be talking about. We're going to be unlocking these secrets of ancient military strategy and discover how these principles can be applied to modern life. And we're talking about everything from business negotiations to personal growth.
Yeah, and I think, a lot of folks might find the art of war a little daunting. It's like, I don't know if I'm ready to be like a general or something, but we're here to break it down. We're going to highlight the most fascinating and relevant parts. So when we think about the big picture of this, like what is at the heart of Sun Tzu's philosophy?
Yeah, I mean, at its core, the art of war is about achieving victory with minimal conflict. And Sun Tzu believed that the best way to win a war is to avoid fighting altogether, or at least to make the fight like as short and decisive as possible. And he emphasizes the importance of careful planning, strategic maneuvering, and understanding both your own strengths and weaknesses, as well as those of your opponent.
Okay, so it's not just about brute force and aggression. It's about being smart and strategic and even a bit cunning. And, one of the things that Sun Tzu is famous for is his emphasis on deception.
Absolutely. Sun Tzu believes that deception is a crucial element of warfare. He argues that, like, appearing weak when you're strong, or, feigning an attack in one direction while your real target is somewhere else, can give you a decisive advantage.
It's not about being unethical, but it's about being strategic and using your opponent's expectations against them. But how does that translate to the real world? I mean, like, I'm not planning on like leading an army into battle anytime soon.
Right. Well, think about a company like Apple. They're masters of deception in the tech world. They create all this buzz around like a new product launch, but they keep the details under wraps. And they leave everybody guessing about the features and the release date. And by the time the product actually hits the market, the anticipation is so high that it practically sells itself.
That's a great example. It's not about like lying or being dishonest. It's about like controlling the narrative and keeping your opponent off balance. Now, Sun Tzu also talked a lot about the importance of knowing yourself and your enemy. What did he mean by that?
Yeah, he believed that a successful leader must have a deep understanding of their own strengths and weaknesses, as well as those of their opponent. Only then can they, like, develop a strategy that plays to their advantages and exploits the enemy's vulnerabilities.
So it's about doing your homework, knowing your own limits,
Yeah.
and really understanding the landscape that you're operating in. And I can see how that would be crucial in any kind of competitive situation, whether it's like a business deal or even just trying to get ahead in your career.
Right. Think about it this way. If you're going into a job interview, you wouldn't show up without researching the company, the position, and the person you're interviewing with, right?
Right.
You'd want to know their expectations, their goals, and even their potential objections to, like, hiring you.
That's a great analogy. It's about being prepared, anticipating challenges, and having a plan to address them.
Yeah.
So knowing yourself and your enemy is about gathering intelligence, but it's also about self-awareness and being honest about your own capabilities.
Exactly. Sun Tzu believed that overconfidence can be just as dangerous as ignorance. A leader who underestimates their enemy or overestimates their own abilities is setting themselves up for failure.
So we've got deception, we've got self-awareness, we've got intelligence gathering. What other key principles did Sun Tzu lay out in The Art of War?
Well, he stressed the importance of planning and preparation. He argues that, like, a well-thought-out plan, taking into account all possible contingencies, is essential for success in any endeavor. He even went so far as to say that every battle is won before it is fought.
Wow, that's a bold statement. Is he saying that the actual fighting is irrelevant?
Well, not exactly, but he's emphasizing that victory is more about having the right strategy in place than it is about brute force or luck. A good general doesn't just react to events, they anticipate them, and they shape the battlefield to their advantage.
So preparation is key. But isn't there a risk of like overthinking things? What if you spend so much time planning that you never actually take action?
That's a valid point. Sun Tzu recognized that there's a balance to be struck between planning and action. He advocated for flexibility and adaptability, arguing that a skilled leader must be able to adjust their plans based on the ever-changing circumstances of the battlefield.
So it's not about sticking rigidly to a plan, but it's about having a framework in place that you can adapt as needed. It's like having a roadmap, but being willing to take detours if the situation demands it.
Precisely. And that leads us to another one of Sun Tzu's key principles, the importance of choosing your battles wisely.
Oh, don't we all need a little more of that in our lives? It's so easy to get caught up in like every little conflict that comes our way. But is that always the best strategy?
Well, Sun Tzu would argue that it's not about engaging in every fight that presents itself, but rather about assessing each situation and determining whether it aligns with your overall goals. Sometimes retreating, avoiding a conflict altogether, or even making concessions can be the most strategic move.
That's a tough pill to swallow sometimes, especially when you feel like you're in the right. But I can see how choosing your battle strategically could save you a lot of time, a lot of energy, and unnecessary conflict.
Right. And that saved energy can be used to focus on the battles that truly matter, the ones that will move you closer to your goals.
So it's about being selective,
Yeah.
being strategic, and sometimes even being willing to walk away from a fight that isn't worth winning. That's a powerful lesson.
It is, and it's one that Sun Tzu illustrates through a series of frameworks and concepts. For instance, he outlines the 5 constant factors, which are like essential elements to consider in any strategic situation. These are moral law, heaven, earth, the commander, and method and discipline.
Those sound pretty abstract. Can you break those down for us a bit? Like, give us some real-world examples.
Absolutely. Let's say you're trying to launch a new business. Moral law in this context would represent like the shared vision and values that unite your team. It's about having a strong company culture where everyone is aligned with the mission.
Okay, so moral law is like the glue that holds the team together. What about heaven?
Yeah, heaven represents external factors that you can't control, like market trends, economic conditions, even the weather. Think of it like the unpredictable forces that can impact your business.
So it's about being aware of the bigger picture, understanding the forces at play, and being prepared to adapt to unexpected changes.
Exactly. And then we have Earth, which represents like the tangible battlefield. In a business context, this would be your market, your competitors, your customer base, the landscape you're operating in.
It's about knowing the terrain,
Mhm.
understanding the players, and choosing the right ground to fight on.
Yeah.
What about the commander? That one seems pretty straightforward.
Yeah, the commander, of course, represents leadership. But it's not just about giving orders, it's about inspiring your team, making
Yeah.
strategic decisions, and being able to adapt to changing circumstances.
So it's about having a vision, being decisive, and
Mhm.
earning the respect of your team. And finally, we have method and discipline, which represent the organizational structure and processes that allow your team to function effectively.
Precisely.
So it's about having clear roles, efficient systems,
Hmm.
and a culture of accountability.
Exactly. And these 5 constant factors are just one example of the frameworks that Sun Tzu provides in The Art of War. He also outlines 7 considerations, a set of questions to ask when assessing a situation to predict victory or defeat.
This is all starting to feel like a masterclass in strategic thinking. I'm already seeing how these principles could be applied to so many different aspects of life.
And we've only just begun to scratch the surface. We haven't even touched on the 9 varieties of ground, Sun Tzu's strategic analysis of different types of terrain, or the 5 types of spies, his fascinating exploration of ancient espionage.
Okay, now you've really got me hooked. I can't wait to delve deeper into those topics. Welcome back to our deep dive into the art of war. Last time we talked about some of the core principles of Sun Tzu's philosophy, like deception, self-awareness, intelligence gathering, planning, and choosing your battles wisely. It's amazing how these ancient ideas still feel so relevant today.
What's really striking about the art of war is that it goes beyond simply winning battles. Sun Tzu was deeply concerned with the ethical and economic costs of warfare.
I've been thinking about that too. We talked about how Sun Tzu emphasized achieving victory with minimal conflict. It's not just about conquering your opponent. It's about finding like the most strategic and efficient path to success.
Exactly. Sun Tzu recognized that prolonged warfare is detrimental to both sides, even the victor. He compared it to like a weapon that becomes dull with overuse.
Okay, that's a powerful image. So how does this idea of avoiding prolonged conflict apply to, like, let's say, a business negotiation?
Imagine you're locked in a tough negotiation with a potential partner. You could dig in your heels, refuse to compromise, and try to squeeze every last concession out of them. But what would that really achieve?
Well, you might end up with a slightly better deal in the short term. but you'd probably damage the relationship in the process. And in the long run, that could cost you more than you gained.
Precisely. Sun Tzu would advise you to seek a swift and decisive resolution, one that benefits both parties and preserves the relationship for future collaborations.
So it's about finding a win-win solution, not just trying to, like, crush your opponent. But how do you achieve that in a competitive environment where everyone's trying to get ahead?
Sun Tzu believed that one of the keys to achieving swift victories is to fortify oneself through the enemy's resources.
Okay, I remember you mentioning this idea before, but I'm still a little unclear on how it works in practice. It sounds a bit like stealing, which doesn't seem very ethical.
It's not about stealing in like the literal sense. It's about being resourceful and finding ways to leverage your opponent's strengths to your own advantage. Think about a tech startup that's developing a new app. They could try to build their entire infrastructure from scratch, which would be costly and time-consuming, or they could partner with an established company that already has a robust platform and a large user base.
So it's about finding synergies, forming strategic alliances,
Yeah.
and turning potential competitors into collaborators. I like it. It's like turning a threat into an opportunity.
Exactly. And this principle can be applied to all sorts of situations. For example, if you're facing a competitor with a strong marketing campaign, you could try to copy their tactics or even better learn from their approach and develop an even more effective strategy.
So it's not about imitation. It's about observation, adaptation, and even inspiration. You're taking their strengths and using them to fuel your own growth. That's a pretty brilliant way to look at it.
And it highlights the importance of being observant, being open to new ideas, and being willing to adapt your approach based on what you learn from others, even your rivals.
Okay, so we've talked about the importance of choosing your battles wisely and fortifying yourself through your enemy's resources. What other insights did Sun Tzu offer when it came to the actual execution of strategy?
He placed a great deal of emphasis on strategic maneuvering and positioning. He argued that a skilled leader must be able to adapt their tactics to the situation, much like water adapts to the shape of its container.
Okay, I love that analogy. It speaks of the importance of flexibility and being able to flow around obstacles rather than trying to force your way through them.
Precisely, Sun Tzu believed that a good general should never be drawn into a battle on the enemy's terms. Instead, they should seek to control the battlefield, dictate the terms of engagement, and force the enemy to react to their moves.
So it's about being proactive, setting the pace,
Mhm.
and keeping your opponent off balance. But how do you actually achieve that in practice?
Sun Tzu offers a number of tactical suggestions. For example, he advises against attacking an enemy who is positioned on high ground.
I can see why that would be a bad idea. Trying to fight uphill would be exhausting and put you at a disadvantage from the start. But how does this idea of high ground apply to, say, a business negotiation? It's not like you're literally fighting on a battlefield.
Think of high ground as having a strategic advantage. It could be having more information, a stronger bargaining position, or even just a more confident demeanor. Sun Tzu would argue that you want to be the one holding those advantages, not your opponent.
So it's about doing your research, knowing your worth, and projecting an aura of confidence and authority.
Exactly. And remember, Sun Tzu also emphasizes the importance of choosing your battles wisely. Sometimes retreating or avoiding a conflict altogether can be the most strategic move.
Okay, but how do you know when to fight and when to walk away? What's the key to making those tough decisions?
Sun Tzu believed that it all comes down to understanding the 9 varieties of ground. He identified 9 different types of terrain, each requiring a specific strategic approach.
9 varieties of ground. That sounds a bit like a military geography lesson. I'm not sure I see how that applies to my life.
Think of it this way. These 9 types of terrain represent different situations you might encounter in your career or personal life. For example, dispersive ground could be a toxic work environment where it's best to retreat and find a better opportunity. Facile ground could be a project that's moving smoothly where you can advance confidently. Contentious ground might be a high-stakes negotiation where you need to carefully consider your every move.
I see. So it's less about the literal terrain and more about understanding the dynamics of the situation you're in and adapting your strategy accordingly.
Exactly. And by understanding the 9 varieties of ground, you can start to see the patterns in your own life and make more strategic decisions about when to push forward, when to hold back, and when to change direction entirely.
This is all so fascinating. I'm starting to see how the art of war is less about literal battles and more about mastering the art of strategy in any situation.
Right.
But we haven't talked much about the role of information in all of this. I mean, knowledge is power, right?
You're absolutely right. Sun Tzu dedicates a whole chapter of the art of war to the importance of intelligence gathering. In fact, he outlines 5 types of spies, each with a specific role to play in gathering information and influencing the enemy.
5 types of spies. Okay, now I'm really intrigued. This sounds like something straight out of a spy thriller. Welcome back to our deep dives into the art of war. So we're wrapping up our exploration of Sun Tzu's strategic brilliance. And this last part is where things get, like, extra intriguing. We're talking spies, secrets, and the kind of knowledge that can make or break an empire or a business deal or even just like a personal decision.
What I find so fascinating about Sun Tzu's approach to intelligence is how he elevates it to an art form. He doesn't just advocate for gathering information, he lays out a system for cultivating and deploying spies with almost surgical precision.
Okay, so last time we left off with that cliffhanger about the 5 types of spies outlined in The Art of War. I'm ready to dive into this world of ancient espionage.
All right, well, let's start with local spies. These are individuals recruited from the enemy's own population. People who are already familiar with the terrain, the customs, the gossip. They're the eyes and ears on the ground.
Okay, so it's like having your own network of informants embedded in enemy territory. Makes sense. They blend in, they know the lay of the land,
Yeah,
and they probably have access to information that, like, an outsider just wouldn't.
exactly. Think about it in a modern business context. If you're trying to break into a new market, wouldn't it be valuable to have someone on your team who understands the local culture, the business practices, even like the unspoken rules of the game?
Absolutely. That kind of insider knowledge could be invaluable.
Yeah.
But what about inward spies? What makes them different from local spies?
Inward spies are even more deeply embedded. Sun Tzu suggests recruiting officials from the enemy's government or military, people with access to sensitive information, strategic plans, maybe even the enemy's weaknesses.
Whoa, that's some high-level espionage. But how do you convince someone to betray their own side? I mean, is it all about, like, money and power, or is there something more to it?
Sun Tzu believed that while rewards can certainly play a role, the most effective way to turn an enemy into an asset is through a combination of persuasion manipulation and understanding their motivations. It's about identifying individuals who might already be disillusioned with their own side or who have, like, personal ambitions that align with your goals.
So it's not just about bribery. It's about psychology strategy and finding the right leverage points. It's almost like a form of negotiation in itself.
Yeah.
Okay, so we've got local spies. We've got inward spies. Who's up next in our spy lineup?
Next, we have converted spies. These are fascinating because they start as the enemy spies but are flipped to work for you.
Talk about turning the tables. That's a bold move.
That's it.
But if you can pull it off, it's a major win. You're not only getting valuable intelligence from the inside, but you're also depriving your enemy of one of their assets.
Precisely. And Sun Tzu outlines several ways to achieve this conversion. It might involve appealing to their sense of morality, offering them safety or protection, or even playing on their ego by making them feel more valued by your side.
So it's a delicate dance of psychology, persuasion, and understanding human nature. Okay, what about doomed spies? That sounds pretty ominous. What's their role in all of this?
Doomed spies are a bit of a tragic figure. They're essentially pawns in a larger game of deception. They are given false information, allowed to be captured by the enemy, and their revelations are used to mislead and manipulate the enemy's strategy.
Wow, that's a high-stakes game. It's a stark reminder that warfare, even in Sun Tzu's time, was a brutal and often ruthless affair.
And while we certainly wouldn't advocate for such extreme tactics in modern times, the principle behind doomed spies, the use of misinformation to manipulate your opponent, is still relevant. Think about the way companies release carefully crafted leaks to generate buzz or steer public opinion.
Okay, I see the connection. It's about controlling the narrative, shaping perceptions, and using information as a weapon.
Precisely. And finally, we have surviving spies. These are the spies who venture into enemy territory, gather intelligence, and most importantly, make it back alive to report their findings.
They're the classic spies, the ones who sneak behind enemy lines, gather intel, and make a daring escape. It's like something straight out of a James Bond film.
And just like in those spy films, Sun Tzu emphasizes the importance of treating these spies with the utmost care and respect. They are risking their lives to provide valuable information.
Okay, but how does all of this ancient spycraft relate to our modern world? I mean, most of us aren't dealing with literal spies and secret missions.
Think about it in terms of information gathering and competitive intelligence. In the business world, surviving spies might be market researchers, data analysts, or even just savvy networkers who are able to glean valuable insights from their industry contacts.
So it's about being observant, asking the right questions, and knowing where to find the information you need to make informed decisions.
Exactly. And even in our personal lives, the principles of intelligence gathering can be incredibly valuable. Think about doing your research before making a big purchase, networking to advance your career, or even just paying attention to social cues to understand the dynamics of a relationship.
So it's about being aware of your surroundings, gathering information from multiple sources, and using that knowledge to your advantage.
And remember, Sun Tzu believed that knowledge is power and that acquiring that knowledge requires a strategic and multifaceted approach.
This has been an incredible journey through the mind of a brilliant strategist.
Yeah.
What stands out to you as, like, the most valuable takeaway from The Art of War?
For me, it's the emphasis on strategic thinking adaptability and the importance of cultivating strong relationships, both with your allies and even your rivals. Sun Tzu reminds us that true victory is not just about winning battles, but about achieving our goals in a way that minimizes harm and maximizes long-term success.
I couldn't agree more. We've covered so much ground in this deep dive,
Yeah.
from deception and intelligence gathering to strategic maneuvering and the importance of choosing your battles wisely. It's amazing how a book written over 2,000 years ago can still be so relevant and insightful today.
If Sun Tzu were alive today, I wonder what he would think of the modern battlefield, the digital landscape of the internet, the constant flow of information, the new forms of warfare that are emerging in the 21st century.
That's a fascinating question to ponder. Would he see the internet as a new kind of terrain to be mastered? A vast network of spies and misinformation to be navigated? Would he adapt his ancient strategies to the digital age?
I suspect he'd be fascinated by the complexities of the modern world and would relish the challenge of applying his principles to this new era of conflict and competition.
And I think he would urge us all to be more mindful, more strategic, and more thoughtful in how we engage in this digital battlefield. We have more information at our fingertips than ever before, but it's up to us to use that information wisely, ethically, and in a way that benefits both ourselves and the world around us.
Well said. The Art of War is a timeless reminder that the principles of strategy and leadership are universal regardless of the era or the battlefield.
And on that note, we'll leave you to ponder the wisdom of Sun Tzu and how it might apply to your own life, your own battles, and your own quest for victory. Until next time, fellow deep divers, keep seeking knowledge, keep challenging assumptions, and keep exploring the world with a curious and strategic mind.